Imagine a world without detectives, without forensics, without even the idea of evidence as we know it. A crime is committed, an accusation is made, but the truth? It's completely hidden. For thousands of years, all the way from ancient Mesopotamia to medieval Europe, societies faced this exact problem with a solution that, to us, feels both terrifying and absolutely fascinating. They would ask God to be the judge. Let's dive into the incredible story of justice, faith, and the brutal system known as Trial by Ordeal. This one sentence from a legal decree around the time of Charlemagne, it just captures the whole idea perfectly. It was a formal surrender. It's admitting that human judgment has its limits. When judges and courts reached the absolute end of their rope, when they just couldn't know the truth, they believed the only way forward was to create a test and trust that a higher power would reveal everything through a miracle. So here's our roadmap. We're going to trace the epic history of this practice. We'll start with the huge problem it was trying to solve, then we'll jump back to its earliest origins. We'll see how it got transformed into a sacred Christian rite, and then how it became central to the law of a very powerful king. After that, we'll get into the big mystery. Was God really intervening? And finally, we'll discover how the sudden collapse of this ancient system accidentally gave birth to something we still use every single day, the trial by jury. Okay, to really get a handle on the ordeal, you have to put yourself in a totally different mindset. We have to understand the massive challenge of finding truth in a world that just didn't have the tools we take for granted. You know, this wasn't some philosophical puzzle. It was the day-to-day reality for early legal systems. I mean, think about it. For crimes like sorcery or adultery or a secret murder, how could a judge possibly know for sure who did it? An oath? People lie. A confession? That could be forced. Justice needed a verdict, but human reason alone just couldn't get there. This is the exact void that the ordeal was designed to fill. And this is a really crucial point. Ordeals weren't just handed out for every little crime. There was a 12th century English law that put it perfectly. The ordeal of hot iron is not to be permitted except where the naked truth cannot otherwise be explored. This was the system's last resort, the ultimate tiebreaker for cases that were simply unknowable. It was a final, desperate appeal to the highest court you could possibly imagine. And this idea of appealing to the divine, it is incredibly ancient. The ordeals we see in medieval Europe weren't some new invention. They were the descendants of a tradition that goes all the way back to the dawn of civilization. So this is one of the earliest forms of the ordeal we know about, and it's written down in one of history's most famous legal documents, the Code of Hammurabi, from around 1750 BCE. The logic was simple and pretty stark. The river itself, often seen as a literal river god, would be the judge. If you drowned, you were guilty. If you managed to survive, you were innocent. Your truth was confirmed by divine intervention. And they weren't using this for petty theft. The river ordeal was saved for the most serious and the most difficult to prove accusations. Sorcery was the classic example in Hammurabi's code, a crime done in total secret. But records we have from the ancient city of Mari show it was also used for adultery, treason, and even murder. These were high-stakes cases where it was one person's word against another's, and that just wasn't enough. This timeline really shows the incredible staying power of the idea. For more than 3,000 years, the basic concept that a physical test could reveal a divine truth, it just kept going. From the rivers of Babylon, the idea was carried into Europe by Germanic tribes, who had their own versions, like trial by combat. And it became so ingrained that by the 12th century, the King of England would make it a cornerstone of his royal law. Now, this next chapter is a huge transformation. It's when this pagan custom gets absorbed and totally redefined by the Christian church. At first, the church was pretty wary of these practices, but eventually they embraced them, turning what was a tribal tradition into a solemn, holy ceremony. This right here is the theological engine that powered the entire medieval ordeal. The term itself, Judicium Dei, it means the judgment of God. It wasn't just about surviving a dangerous test. No, it was about the belief that God himself would actively participate, that he would make the water boil hotter for a guilty person, or miraculously heal the flesh of an innocent one. Every single ordeal became a stage for a potential miracle. So as you can see, the tests were remarkably specific, and each one had its own theological logic behind it. The ordeal of hot iron, that was a direct, terrifying test of God's protection. The same idea applied to the ordeal of hot water, where you had to pull a stone out of a boiling cauldron. But the cold water ordeal, this one's fascinating. It operated on a reverse logic. Here, they tie you up and lower you into water that a priest had blessed. The belief was that this pure, holy water would physically reject a sinner, refusing to accept them. So, if you floated, that was a sign of guilt. Sinking, paradoxically, proved your innocence. The whole process was incredibly ritualized. This wasn't some crude punishment happening out in a village square. It started inside a church, with a priest blessing the iron. That's the hallowing. Then, the accused would perform the test. Right after, their hand was bandaged and sealed up tight so no one could tamper with it. And then, everyone waited for 3 days. On the third day, the seal was broken. If the wound was healing cleanly, God had performed his miracle and they were innocent. If it was festering and infected, God had passed his judgment. They were guilty. So, this is the key takeaway here. The church wrapped the ordeal in its most sacred and powerful rites. The accused would often fast and pray for days leading up to it. The ordeal itself was part of a mass, with communion and everything. This wasn't just a legal procedure, it was a deeply spiritual event designed to call down the direct and awesome power of God in the name of earthly justice. All right, so now that the ordeal is established as the sacred rite, it's about to become something more, a tool of the state. We're heading to 12th century England, where one of the most powerful kings in its history is about to make the Judicium die the law of the entire land. Henry II was a king who was obsessed with order and control. After a messy period of civil war, he was determined to centralize justice, to take power away from all the local lords and put it firmly in the hands of the crown. The Assize of Clarendon was his masterstroke, a huge set of legal reforms that would change the course of English law forever. And right there in Clause 2, you see the key provision. Henry decreed that anyone accused of a major crime by a jury of his neighbors must go to the judgment of water. The ordeal was no longer just an option for impossible cases. It was now the mandatory state-sanctioned way to determine guilt or innocence for all major crimes. The impact of this was enormous. For the first time, you had a systematic, kingdom-wide procedure. Henry created what we now call a jury of presentment, groups of local men who were sworn to identify suspected criminals in their area. This, by the way, is a direct ancestor of our modern grand jury. And by forcing these cases to be resolved by ordeal in the king's name, he basically transferred the whole system of justice from local manors to his own royal courts. But this entire system rested on one massive assumption, that God would actually show up and intervene. For centuries, historians have been debating what was really going on here. Was the ordeal truly a window into the divine, or was it a much more human system, just cleverly disguised as an act of faith? There are really two main schools of thought here. The act of faith view says that people genuinely believed in it. The psychological pressure was just so intense that a guilty person, totally convinced God was about to expose them, would just confess rather than face the pain and, eternal damnation. But the human system view argues that the priests running the show were doing something much more subtle. They were using the ordeal as a kind of sophisticated lie detector, just watching the accused's behavior. A guilty person would likely refuse the test, basically confessing, while an innocent person, confident God would protect them, would go through with it. And the priest, acting as a judge of character, could then subtly rig the outcome. And there's actually some evidence for this second view. The official instructions for the ordeals created clear opportunities for manipulation. The liturgies for the hot iron ordeal, for instance, said that after the fire was brought into the church, only the priest and the accused should remain. Well, that gives a priest who thinks the person is innocent the chance to let the iron cool down a bit, or heat it for a shorter time. For the water ordeal, he could control the temperature, or maybe even use a pole to kind of guide the result. They had both the motive and the means to do it. But here's the brilliant, and maybe a little chilling reality of it all. The system worked, either way. Whether you believe God was performing miracles or that priests were fixing the results, the effect on the person accused was exactly the same. As the historian Henry Charles Lee wrote, a guilty person would have to be incredibly tough to go through it with, knowing they faced not just earthly punishment, but divine wrath. The ordeal was just an incredibly powerful psychological tool. So for centuries, this system of divine judgment was at the very center of European law. And then, almost overnight, it just vanished. The story of its collapse and what rose up from the ashes is one of the most pivotal and totally unintended moments in all of legal history. The year is 1215. Now, this is the same year that King John of England was forced to sign the Magna Carta. But another, equally massive event was happening in Rome that was about to send shockwaves through the entire legal world. At one of the most important church councils of the Middle Ages, the Pope issued a stunning decree. Canon 18 straight up forbade clergy from taking part in any procedure that involved bloodshed. This meant no leading mercenaries, no performing surgery, and, crucially, no administering the ordeals. The church officially pulled its support. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The ordeal's entire legitimacy was based on it being a judicium Dei, a judgment of God, administered through a holy religious ritual. Without the priest to bless the water, to hallow the iron, to say the Mass, it was just a brutal, meaningless test. The theological foundation was just ripped out from under it, and the entire legal framework built on top of it came crashing down. This created a huge legal vacuum. In England, where Henry II had made the ordeal mandatory, the courts were suddenly paralyzed. They had a system for accusing people, that jury of presentment, but now they had no recognized way to figure out if they were actually guilty. So, what do? The answer came just 4 years later, and it was pretty much born from pure necessity. The government of the young King Henry III sent out these urgent instructions to its judges. Since the ordeal was now forbidden, they had to improvise. The edict encouraged them to use those same local guys who had made the accusation, the jury of presentment, to now also make the final verdict. It was a radical, almost desperate solution. And this marks the final, crucial pivot. The jury, which had been created by the Assize of Clarendon to start a process that ended in the ordeal, was now being asked to end it. It was no longer their job to just say, "We suspect this person." Now they had to weigh the facts they knew and declare this person is guilty or not guilty. In the void left by the judgment of God, the judgment of ordinary people was born. The modern trial jury literally emerged directly from the ashes of the ordeal. It's really an incredible legacy. A system built on faith in divine miracles collapses, and in its place rises a system built on faith in human reason. But that fundamental problem that started this whole thing, it never really went away. Even with all our modern technology and forensic science, we still face cases where the truth just seems unknowable. And it leaves us with a final, fascinating question. When we ask 12 citizens to go into a room and find the truth beyond a reasonable doubt, are we asking them to do something all that different from what our ancestors asked of their God?